With thousands of public blockchains available, there is almost always one with the feature you're looking for. You want top-notch performance in real-world situations? You can have it. You need lightning transactions to pay for a coffee in a second and not 10 minutes? You can have them. You need decentralization, where decisions and transactions are controlled by more than a handful of people? You can have it. You need an on-chain identity controlled completely by you that can never be hacked or stolen? You can have it. But finding all of these in one place is impossible, or at least it was impossible. With dual-chain network architecture, Metaverse delivers a more complete solution without compromise, introducing a second, faster blockchain alongside Metaverse ETP. DNA will process blocks in a fraction of a second, like a transactional superhighway, meeting the base chain at set intervals to collect data. This blindingly fast chain means that DNA will support powerful tools and features like digital identities, data feeds, integrated lightning channels, and decentralized exchanges, using delegated proof of stake to reward participation in network security, allowing anyone to contribute and benefit. The next generation of blockchain cannot afford to sacrifice, requiring all the tools businesses and organizations need to change the world, finally in one. The next generation arrives with DNA, the Metaverse dual-chain network architecture. With all of this potential at your disposal, what will you achieve?
The second cloud conference that we're doing in our new digital way because of all the lockdown measurements worldwide, of course, and we want to engage with the community with some really interesting speakers, some news and developments worldwide. One of the major changes that we've seen since February of 2020 is, of course, that we're working from home. We're working online, we're working from home with all the adaptations and changes that we are engaging. So some of the things that we will address is basically the new workplace. Is the new workplace for good going to be the kitchen table, the dining room table, or the office upstairs? And what changes does this bring to our new environment? Our first speaker that I want to welcome is also representing our sponsor, Metaverse DNA. He's the CEO of Metaverse DNA, and I would like really to welcome Eric Yu, who enables us all to have this online cloud conference together. And Eric's going to speak about leadership in cryptocurrencies. Welcome, Eric. Thank you for joining us today. It's already our second edition, and I'm really excited that we can do this thanks to Metaverse DNA. I hope many will follow because, as we knew from recent developments, it's going to be a very, very long time before we will be able to meet in person worldwide again. So really welcome. I understood you were going to talk about leadership in crypto, so the floor is yours, basically.
Hello, everyone. This is Eric Gu. Very good to see you again. This is the second cloud conference. This time, our subject is workplace. I think very importantly, in the workplace, we need to talk about leadership and ethics. So I'm going to start with this topic. So our crypto industry, I'm actually very glad that we can call this industry right now. We're actually large enough and mature enough now. And I believe this industry is quite cyclical, meaning 3 and 10 months, we have a boom and bust, usually. I'm lucky enough to experience the first two, 2013 and 2017. And glad to see a lot of good companies and good business initiatives started back then. And now we're going to have another boom very soon, hopefully. Hopefully it will be second half of this year, which is almost right now, and first half of next year. So I'm thinking that before this, we will see even more companies and more initiatives, good initiative business coming to the play. But I think this is probably the best time to call for a leadership. A lot of people say crypto is about decentralized, but in the decentralized world, we still need leadership. For example, the common values we still hold true, although we're in the crypto industry. So the fairness, the truthfulness, a lot of value that we hold dear, still very important in our industry. So there are somebody, or say some organization, needs to take this leadership. So, for example, many of I want to call all the crypto projects to be open source and transparent. So we don't want to repeat the mistakes that the current financial system is making at this moment. And I like to call all the smart contracts and programs and coding be reviewed by third party. So there won't be financial loss, unnecessary financial loss going forward, because our industry gonna grow much more faster and much more bigger. So we need to take this preventative measure as of now. We need to do this. And also we need to have an organization, or maybe more, to check a lot of the ethics, or say a lot of the what's the right word? A lot of the values that we need to uphold. For example, although we're decentralized, we still need to check KYC, anti-money laundering. We don't want to finance any criminals, and we need to provide protection to users that need to protect their privacy data. That's very important. I've seen a lot of problem going from the current big companies like Facebook or Twitter. They lose their customer information, their privacy data. This is a pity. So basically, in our industry, we need to prevent this from happening. And also, we need to protect our own identity, not to be exploited by malicious individuals, organizations, even some ruthless governments. So these things, these ethics, this leadership needs to be caught at this moment in our industry. So this will be my very short speech, and I return this to the host, Anamika.
Welcome, Eric. Let me put on my camera as well. Yeah, there I am. Actually, what you do is you appeal to the industry for responsibility.
Yes.
If I sum it up in one sentence, to take lessons learned from the past, put, I would say, best practices forward, all the things that we learned from, I would say, the past very fast developments in the IT sector. One of the major points that you came up with just now was our own identity. Of course, I know you're very interested in digital identity. Interesting fact today is that I was approached by somebody so famous I couldn't imagine they found me online, and actually somebody's exploiting their identity on LinkedIn. And you have to really check twice to see that this is a fraud. Somebody actually put pictures, names, all sorts of things. There's no way that on this platform I could see that this was not real if it hadn't raised my suspicion of who it was. So you raised a very vital point. When you say decentralized versus responsibility and open source, once something is open source, do you see that as a common responsibility of everybody using it? Because then it's open source and you can do with it whatever you want? Or do you see still a responsibility for the person who puts the open source software there?
I think open source is a way to be honest to all your users, and you kind of relinquish your total control of this piece of code. So nowadays it's pretty strange time that if you look the crimes before, we always imagine this robbery or say force entering your home or say something like violent. But nowadays, no. It's more like I put some software that you don't know, you download, you don't know it, and it just steal your identity or money or some other things. So it's pretty important to be open source. So it's fact checked by other people, other experts. That's very important. So, but not everybody are tech savvy. I wouldn't say that download at your own risk. I'll say at least you can fact check with other people that this is legit software.
You mentioned the ethical aspect of Facebook. Now, we all know for the last year at least that's been under huge attention in the USA. There's been hearings, there's been all sorts of things going on. We've got another thing on several sites that you have sort of reviews that are actually paid reviews, and they're not to be trusted. How do you see that the public can be informed on that? It's about products, it's about restaurants. Many of these things are actually paid content, so we don't recognize it as such. We think it's honest people who are just telling us what a great product it is.
Yeah, well, Twitters and Facebooks, they were really good companies. They were like technical leader before, but slowly they kind of absolute power gave absolute corruption. I wouldn't call them totally corrupted, but when you start to censor people's message, you become the judge of information. That's another crime. Sorry, I say that. It's another crime they committed, other than the identity problem.
No, I think you're right. The judge of information, if I go online and I see something and I have no way of knowing whether this is true or not, it's very difficult to put value on what I'm reading. Can I trust this? Is it real? I mean, there are lots of people who think that Facebook posts are a newspaper. I mean, it goes that far already, and we all know that's not the case. It's bias.
That's very dangerous. All Facebook needs to do is just censor one part of the idea, right? Say, I only allow the left-leaning idea go through. I don't allow the right-leaning idea to go through. That should do it. I mean, that's all they need to do, right? But the thing is, that's why I'm saying open source, and you have an ethics standard, or say you have a leadership come out to say, you cannot do this, or say, can I review your code and can I review your practice, right? How do you actually, conduct your business at the coding level and at your operating or the best practice level, that we need to have an audit or review, right?
I think you brought up a new aspect that we haven't discussed on any of the Lightman reports or the interviews that we did on the subject of, the recent status of our industry, and that's judge of information. I think it's a very critical ethical point that actually sums it up. If you do an appeal on responsibility for whatever you do online, I think judge of information is a new aspect. I really would like to go into that in some of the other talks that we have, because I feel lots of information is being judged for me, and I don't know that. I just look at it and I am not aware of the fact that it is being judged for me, whether this is right or wrong, or what I should understand from this. Maybe that's one of the reasons we get all these, conspiracy theories, I think they're called. Right. Lots of people telling all sorts of stuff. And I mean, we recently with COVID-19 saw the risk of some of these conspiracy theories, like, people did horrible things to themselves thinking it was good for them. Somebody judged that information as being okay, and then people get hurt. So that has serious consequences. I think judge of information is really a good point to take forward. We're going to have some other speakers today about things in the workplace, but I think your theme of calling out for responsibility for leadership in our industry, for self-governance, basically, before everybody else starts telling us what to do and what not to do, and have all sorts of situations that everybody always complains about, regulatory issues, closing down, this is allowed, this is not allowed. We could also switch it around and be self-regulatory and do a much better job as what we're doing as an industry. I think I want to thank you very much for the insight. I think in that appeal for responsibility, I really take the point of judge of information as one of the key elements. I'm going to take us to our next speaker. I want to introduce him to everybody. He's Gordon Einstein. He's, I would say, a global speaker and a global traveler. He's a crypto lawyer. He specializes in all the legal corners of our industry. He is world famous for speeches on intellectual property and on licensing and all sorts of other issues within the crypto industry, and he specializes in that. I'm most honored that we can receive him today as one of our guests. Gordon, hi, how are you?
I am very good, thank you. I'm thrilled to be with you, and I like this tool you're using. I've been playing around like a nerd, clicking on the buttons and stuff, so this is great.
I was already sort of thinking you might be doing that.
Yeah.
Gordon has some really characteristic things. He's sort of a very, how do you say, outspoken person within the legal department of cryptocurrencies and blockchain technology. He's been in the industry for a long time. His firm is based in California in the USA, but he is for a large part of the year all over the globe, if I might say so. At least before COVID-19, you were.
Yeah, in the good old days, I'm grounded.
Yes.
I can be virtually anywhere, so there you go.
So Gordon, today you're going to talk about software project and distributed developers, like most of us now use by being grounded, basically. It's not just the preference of being digitally distributed, which most of us were in the past already, but it's a necessity now. We can't do anything else. And in that space, people create things. There is basically the creation of intellectual property and a lot of traps that we have in the area. So I'm giving the floor to you and looking forward to what you have us to tell about that.
I appreciate it. Now, let me see if I can walk the walk and share my screen. Let's see here. I'm sure I can. Oh, there it is. Share screen. And then we're going to go application window, and we're going to do this. Wow. You guys are snazzy. And feel free to jump in also and kind of guide me for time and ask questions, but I'm just going to start. So,
yeah.
So, you raised a great point, and actually, it's 100% true. The world, and I'll be talking about this, the world was already, when it comes to software development, distributed, international, borders collapsing, everything else. But you said something interesting there. It's now what became optional or an optimized kind of thing has now become mandatory, because in the US you can't leave your freaking house. So even down the block we're distributed and decentralized. I own a cloud computing company, and my coworkers are in West Los Angeles, and I haven't seen them for months. And I'd like to see them, I just can't. So it's on one hand, we're all having a little bit of a rough time right now, but on the other hand, it's forcing efficiencies and progress that sure we're going to happen anyways, but it's making them happen, which might actually be a good thing, because when we all cross over to the sort of virtual connected world and we get rid of the long tail of what happened before, maybe we can standardize and make this new world better. So I like the point you raised. So most of you are watching this are going to be one way or another involved in companies that have software development projects. A webinar or a conference I was just in, kind of attacked the idea that any company could possibly not be a tech company these days. Like literally every company is a tech company. If you're a farmer, if you're building a dam, whatever you're doing, there's so much technology and software involved. There's that expression, software is eating the world, that you can't help but to be involved with it. And once you achieve a certain scale, or even when you're just starting off, you're going to end up customizing software or building software. You're either going to have the software built from scratch to meet your needs, or you're going to take off-the-shelf software like Salesforce, for example, and customize it, because everyone's a little bit different. Everyone needs a different tailored environment. So this thing has only become more important and more challenging. Now, when we look at software development from a legal perspective, this soap opera at least has two characters. On one hand, we have the client or the project. And from my perspective, or at least from this talk's perspective, really depends who's paying me. From my perspective and this talk's perspective, the client or the project is the hero of that soap opera. And I wouldn't say the villain, but the other character that the client or the hero of the project is working with is the developer. And you can see on the screen, I kind of made these defined terms and their caps, all kinds, or initial capitalization, just so you can clearly tell who's who in the next slides. Now, when I say developer kind of calls to mind a whole range of things. And it can be a single individual, working from their home in Ukraine. It can be a large international development company with thousands of employees and staff. And it can run the whole gamut, but the principles behind software development are consistent. And this is especially true in this new international world. So let's take an overview of sort of modern software development challenges, again, exacerbated or brought to the fore by COVID. I have some casual terms for them. One term is developer sprawl. This is the idea that this developer is no longer down the street. They're no longer some company that you have a contract with. Say, if I'm in America, they're in America. These developers are international. And they themselves are decentralized, and they themselves are distributed. They can be a network of contracts and contractors and relationships. So you get this, not company you're working with, not necessarily an individual you're working with, but this amorphous cloud, this sprawl of counterparties that you're working with if you're a client or a project. That's one element. Now, this developer sprawl, these challenges are kind of interactive, or at least one leads to the next. Developer sprawl interacts directly with this sort of gig planet idea. People don't have jobs like they used to. It's not the 1940s where you spent your whole life at General Motors and then retired on a pension. It seems like these days everyone is a contractor, and everyone is a contractor to multiple clients. And to be an employee, especially with some kind of tenure, is fantastically rare. And the remote, decentralized, and distributed and international nature of this world enhances that, because it's much more difficult to have an employee that's outside of your country. I mean, are you going to set up a local entity to hire them? You're almost certainly not. You're going to contract with them directly as sort of equal parties. So that's what I call the gig planet phenomena. And the third main challenge facing software projects is what I refer to as code stew, which is, it's not like a nice piece of steak and you can identify that it came from this cow. And I hope I'm not offending any vegans in the audience. But if you're looking at a steak, you can assume it came from one cow. When you're looking at software code, God knows where that code came from. That code can be something that someone else wrote 10 years ago that ended up on GitHub, that got repurposed. It could be open source. It's really hard to trace the provenance of code, but it matters because code stew, it makes determining the ownership of code and the right to transfer ownership of that code unclear. So, it's challenging, but obviously projects are happening and people are being successful. So how do we address this? Let's dive into developer sprawl. What are the consequences of being geographically distributed? Well, it's the usual. There's language issues, and these aren't necessarily legal issues, but there's language issues. There's local custom and mores may be different depending on the countries you're in, and this can lead to communication problems. There's time zone variances. I mean, if you're in America, do you want to be up while your Ukrainian development team is up? Do they want to be up while you're up? Different countries have different legal systems. And even when the legal systems are good and fair and fast, it's hard to enforce a contractual relationship at a distance. It just is. And of course, when people are physically distant and you're not in the same physical space, there's sometimes issues with accountability and responsiveness. And again, these are not purely legal issues. Everyone is with developer sprawl. Okay, so how do you address developer sprawl? Well, good legal work and planning can help, but it doesn't solve it. So I'm not promising to solve it, but I can help address it. Likewise, good tools like Jira or GitHub or Agile or Scrum or whatever the modern version of those things can help. The third issue, Gig Planet, let's dive into that a little bit. Again, it's very rare for developers to be direct employees of the client. In fact, it's very rare or not common for developers to be direct employees of the developer that's been hired by the client. The developer hired by the client may, in fact, be having their own contractors, and those contractors may have contractors, and it goes on and on and on. So the situation you're in as a client is you rarely know the actual identity of the actual developer doing the developing. It's kind of strange. You know who emailed you or sent you the updates, but you don't necessarily know who did the code. And finally, again, code stew. This has a couple of different facets. The code stew is, number one, people repurpose code that they find online or in books or elsewhere, and they don't necessarily attribute ownership or the source. Code stew is caused by the success of open source software and the utility and vibrancy of open source software. Why program from scratch, unless you're IBM, I guess, when you can borrow or take from an open source software project. What makes this complex is different open source or OSS projects have different licenses available to them. There's an MIT license, there's an Apache license, there's several, and those licenses have different provisions. There's the GPL. Those licenses have different provisions about when can you use that code, that OSS code in a commercial product. Does that code need itself to be OSS? Do you need to do attribution? No, and it's a real thing. Now, there's a different angle to code stew, which is if I'm a software developer, I don't want to code the same thing twice. So when I get a project in, like a lawyer, I'll look to see whether I did a similar project before, and my desire is to simply take what I did before, change a few lines for the new client and charge them. So developers like to reuse their own code, and it's a natural thing. It's economically efficient, and it probably actually reduces bugs because they're familiar with that code. Likewise, when a developer is developing code for our hero, the client, that developer is probably going to want to reserve the right to use that code for a future client. Well, if I'm the client and I'm paying that developer to develop custom code, do I really want that developer to basically develop that code on my dime and then sell it to someone else? Probably not, or at least I want to control that. So there's two key client agreements that are important when it comes to software development. The first key agreement is the non-disclosure agreement, or also called a confidentiality agreement. It's usually referred to it as a non-disclosure agreement or an NDA. Then there's the second main agreement is the software development agreement. Now, these things can go by different names, of course, but software development agreement is a common name, and I'm going to abbreviate that in this presentation as the SDA. So let's talk about some practice tips that apply to both an NDA and also an SDA. So here's the general idea. These are important documents. You don't want to sort of develop them ad hoc for every software development project you as a client are engaging in. You want to invest the appropriate level of resources and time and thought to both these documents, developing good, tight, well-drafted, standardized forms. So you want to standardize NDA for your company, and you want to standardize SDA for your company. And how do you get this standardized if everything in life can be different? Well, when you structure these documents, and this is for the lawyers and the entrepreneurs out there, when you structure these documents, put all the generic stuff in the main document text and put all the customization into the attached exhibits, and then just incorporate those by reference. That way you can save yourself a lot of time, because every time you have a new NDA or a new SDA, you're simply changing the exhibits. You're not really changing the main agreement. And then a sub-note on that is a good way to reference from the main agreement to the exhibits is to use defined terms in the main agreement. So for example, the very first paragraph says, I'm contracting with XYZ developer. You don't want to have the whole document be XYZ developer, because then you have to search and replace everything. So you want to define XYZ developer as the developer. Then you just have to change it once when you have a new document. So that's a general drafting tip. Also, I really like document automation. Where you type in answers, fill in some forms, and then it generates the document for you. And HotDocs is a good program for doing that. Now, here's a little sneaky trick for everyone out there who's a potential client. I think most of your clients do this. I mean, most of the people watching this probably do this already. But to be clear, you don't want to be emailing a PDF for the person to print out, sign, scan, email back. That's very 2005. What you want to do is you want to use an online execution tool like a DocuSign. And then people can electronically sign these documents and you'll get them back. Of course, there's the obvious efficiencies involved in doing that. But what's neat about DocuSign and other tools is you can set the signing order. So if you have multiple parties, you can mandate that the other party has to sign first, and then it comes to you for signature. So that's a neat little thing. Also, psychologically, the recipient of agreements on DocuSign is much less likely to aggressively negotiate every term. When you email them a document, whether it's a Word document or a PDF, you're asking, kind of begging for them to make comments. You're opening yourself up to them making comments. If you send it by DocuSign, it's a little bit more of a process, and it's less likely that they're going to fight back as hard on particular terms. And so long as your documents that you're sending are reasonably fair, then it's a good result for both people. It actually just makes the whole process much more efficient. Okay, now let's talk about NDAs specifically. When do you have your developer or prospective developer sign the NDA? Please execute this NDA, right? Because if you do it later, it becomes unclear where the dividing line is between the confidential information and the non-confidential information. So basically, when you talk to the developer first, it's like name, serial number, email address, and keep it there until you've assigned NDA. Now, NDAs are relatively short documents, 3-4 pages. You don't go crazy with your NDA. You want them to be tight, but you want them to be fair. Why fair? Why am I a lawyer saying be fair? Well, the first thing is you don't want to scare away developers, and they should be scared away by overly aggressive NDA. I've had clients I told to turn down deals because the NDA was stupid or too aggressive. So, if you want to work with someone, don't be a jerk. Send them something fair. Send them something balanced. Also, when you get too aggressive with an NDA, it may not be enforceable. It may be an unreasonable restraint on trade or something like that. So you want it to be tailored. And I guess my final tip when it comes to NDAs is don't just go online and find one and just reuse it. You want an NDA that's specifically tailored for software development. Okay, not a generic one. Generic ones are not terribly enforceable. Sorry, can I call? Okay, so there's NDAs. Now, SDAs generally. This is the key document. Your client's company's life depends on it. Because if you have holes in your software development agreement, it can be a disaster for your company, especially if it gets into intellectual property litigation. So you have the NDA before you start talking about the project, but you have the SDA before any actual work is done on the project. Before money changes hands, before the developer develops, you need a signed SDA in place. And this document, is going to be more aggressive because it has to be to protect the client than the NDA. So that's SDAs in general. Now, I can't go over every facet of SDAs, of course, but here's some key issues to pay attention to. Really key is who owns the work product that the developer is developing. Keep in mind that if a developer is not, at least under US law, if a developer is not your employee, if it's a contractor, for example, okay, everything they do belongs to them, but even if you pay them to do it. Okay, there's a thing called the work for hire doctrine. So unless you contract otherwise, the default rule is if you pay a developer to develop something and they give it to you, they're really just giving you a license. They're not giving you ownership. So you need to be real clear about your ownership expectations in your SDA. Who owns the result? Are you the client receiving a license or the actual product? There's that kind of great interesting thing with Microsoft and IBM back when Microsoft was taking off. They did this kind of judo on IBM where they licensed the software or got the ability to license software. And IBM said, oh, we don't care about that. We just care about hardware. Well, look at IBM now and look at Microsoft now. So that's a key issue. Another key issue, fees and expenses. And and when do expenses get reimbursed? Do I submit a receipt and then, if I'm the developer, do I submit a receipt, get paid a year later? I mean, how long should it be? You also want testing and acceptance of the software. You, the client, shouldn't just take whatever the developer gives you. You should have the right to review it, have it audited, and have a formal acceptance process. And silence should not equal consent. You should proactively test that software and have the right to do it. And this all kind of generally falls under the rubric of you want to allocate risk and liability intentionally and in the document. Now, drilling in on key representations of warranties in the SDA. You want the developer to warrant the quality of the services and the deliverables. It can't be junk. It has to be good code. It has to be best practices. Or if there's a reason not to, you need to talk it through and then document it. They, of course, want to include something that does include viruses or other malicious code. I've never actually seen a software developer include viruses or malicious code intentionally, but sometimes they have rogue employees, and if they do, or they put in a backdoor and it gets exploited later, you want the developer to indemnify the client. In other words, make the client whole in the case there is a virus or malicious code. This last one is extremely key. You must have the developer represent and warrant that the code that they're delivering to the client does not infringe on any third party's rights, especially and including intellectual property rights. That includes open source software, okay? That includes former clients. The developer has to have the legal right to give you, the client, what they say they're giving you. And they have to represent and warrant explicitly that that's the case. So let's talk about, remember I said you want a generic, if you're the client and you're doing a lot of software development, remember you want a generic software development agreement, so you don't have to hire a lawyer every single time and just drive yourself crazy. Most of your customization is going to go into the main exhibit to the SDA, and that's almost always called the statement of work. Call that exhibit A, the statement of work. That's your main customized exhibit. In your statement of work, you want to have detailed milestones of the project, and you want to divide it up, phases, prerequisites, timing, all that other good stuff. Really include the timing. You don't want timing for the end product, you want timing for each milestone. And you want consequences or cures if timing is lost. And sometimes timing should be lost. If the developer finds something legitimate, brings an opportunity to make it better to the client, and the client wants things to be better, sometimes it may take more time, but that's okay. You just need a written way of managing that. And that kind of leads to the next point. If something goes wrong, all these agreements I see from other lawyers, say, the developer has to do certain things, but doesn't say what happens if the developer fails or neglects to do those things. You need some method of addressing deficiencies. You need notice. You need cure. You need what happens if the developer doesn't fix it in time. You need dispute resolution. It really matters, especially if what the developer is developing is the key business proposition of your company. Now, this is a little bit less related to the SDA, but just a generally good idea. And you want to have a provision, developer sort of like shipping you when they feel like it, the most recent version, or sharing a screen with you, but never actually giving you the software. That's a bad idea. Okay, the developer can hold you, the client, hostage by not delivering software, kind of like, someone fixes your house and refuses to put it in the bathroom. The developer can disappear. The developer can become unavailable. They can go bankrupt. They can die. Who knows? So you absolutely want a third-party, company that the developer is going to check software into, that software or that code is available to you, the client, no matter what. It helps for versioning. It helps for tracking progress and seeing if those milestones are being achieved. So you're not just getting words from the developer, but you're actually seeing it. It's good for code auditing because if it's checked in, you can check it against open source software. It's just a very useful tool. So that, of course, is going to be a separate agreement with that third party, but you want to include in your software development agreement that you're going to require a third-party source code escrow, and you want some sort of cost allocation. Maybe the client should pay for it. Maybe the parties should split the fees. I actually think it's more fair for the client to pay for it, but different people have different opinions. But it's just a great tool. And I think I did that in my 15 minutes. So I'm going to open it up for questions and pass the microphone back to you. And I know I spoke fast. I had to get through all this, but I'm happy to share the deck.
I'm putting the camera on as well. Hi, that was great. Thank you so much. It also made a perfect connection to one of our other speakers later, which is Sebastian van der Lans, who is representing WordProof, the completely new development within DocuSign. In Europe, in some instances, you have to paragraph, all pages of legal contracts.
Mm-hmm.
So timestamping each page into a different phase, or content, or articles, or lots of, I would say, fixing in time that this at this moment was mine, or this at this moment was this version. We of course have to, some things like how would you spell that? Things that are sort of common knowledge that people say, oh, but I didn't know it was yours or whatever. So you see this product.
Type stuff.
Sorry?
Like chain of title / origin, right? You're putting everyone on, I guess I call it constructive notice. They don't have an excuse for not knowing anymore.
Yes. Right? Well, these articles are all at the bottom labeled like, that they are timestamped on WordProof and that people can prove that they actually did the article in this fashion, because also in cases that things are changed later on and people make it look like you were the one writing it or you were the one doing this, that you can prove, no, it was not me, it was somebody else, because when I did it, it looked like this. So it's a great link to what WordProof has been doing in the past already. It's an operational piece of software. I like it. It's a lot better than DocuSign because I get then a signature page like is very used in America. In Europe, they're not accepted in a lot of cases. It's typical Anglo-Saxon law because in Germany, you have to do every single page of the whole thing. They won't accept it.
I'm very interested in the project you're mentioning. What I do with DocuSign is I have the parties initial every page. You can do that. But, but you're right, it's an option. It's not a mandatory thing. So no. I always make it so my client signs last, and I always make it so both parties initial every page.
Yeah. Well, I think you'd be really interested in some of the new possibilities to hash it on the blockchain, and because DocuSign is not a blockchain product in that sense. So it's a combination. I mean, blockchain is in the background with this product, so it's not so much that oh God, let us do this on the blockchain. Blockchain is used because it's incorruptible. You can, timestamping is of course older than just today. It's one of the origins of Bitcoin as such that we knew timestamping is integrated in that. But I think it was remarkable that you were just going into the direction of DocuSign. I didn't know that. The other main thing that I wanted to ask you about, what happens if you put an NDA out and it's ignored? I mean, you go to court, but in a lot of cases, how do you prove it's been violated?
Well, the last thing you want to do, you don't want to go to court, okay, in general.
That's what I say. What should you be watching out for? What should it basically be stored, lack of a better explanation, to avoid you getting there?
Well, so I'm going to say this from the client's perspective. NDAs are useful not just to enforce non-disclosure on the developer or prospective developer. You can use it strategically to send it to the developers' connections, clients, whatever. Say, you are now informed that this developer has signed this NDA. We have reason to believe that this developer is violating it by using our intellectual property. You don't want to say this casually. You want to do it because you know it, okay? If you participate in this breach of contract, we're going to hold you liable also, okay? Pardon my French, that will cause a shitstorm for the developer. This is like a nuke. You really don't want to use this, but if they're, going rogue with the software you paid for, have at it. I've done this. Okay. Dear third party, you are now inducing a breach of contract. Okay. You're going to be subject to damage. And, usually the clients have deeper pockets than the developers. And that's a clutch, that's a sword of Damocles you can hold over their head. And it's appropriate to do it if the developer's really absconding. Also, almost every NDA has specific language in there that says both parties recognize that irreconcilable harm can happen if the receiving party discloses this information. Therefore, the giving party has the right to go get an injunction. In other words, go to court and get an order that directs the disclosing party to no longer disclose or to return the information or something. You don't need to wait for a court case to play out. So you file for what's called a preliminary injunction.
The example that you mentioned of Microsoft and IBM is a classic in our industry. I was recently pointed out to another classic. I know this will appeal to you, but it's the Rolls-Royce case. Do you know that one?
I do not. Tell me.
Okay, Rolls-Royce went belly up a couple of years back, and then Volkswagen bought everything, but they were not bought to buy the name of Rolls-Royce, and BMW bought it after they collected all the money from Volkswagen. So the whole new operation of Rolls-Royce is a BMW thing, and most people know that. What most people don't know is that prior to that, Volkswagen bought the whole shop, and they basically didn't get the brand.
I call that sneaky lawyer tricks.
It's just, I was looking at that case on a BBC documentary, and I was like amazed at how such enormous law firms can still, basically not aware of what was going on. They just didn't buy the brand.
It happens all the time, the time. I'm a big fan. That's why I put it in the presentation. I'm a big fan of checklists, and people, when you work with the same document, you get blind to it after a while. It's hard, especially for your life as working with documents, like my exciting life is. But checklists are good, and here's a little tip for document drafters out there. 2 tips. Have a checklist that randomizes the order. You can do this in Excel. Okay, that's what keeps it fresh in your mind. That way you won't skim to the part you know. You randomize the order. You're like, oh yeah, woo. And then tip number 2 for document drafters is when you're reviewing a document, read from the bottom up. Okay, your brain will not then get a narrative flow because it's disjointed, and it will keep you focused. But you're right. It's just intellectual property bite so many ventures in the butt. Pardon my French. Including maybe especially the big ones.
Especially the big. Some of the other tricks that you said, standardization. I'm a big fan of that. The more you standardize, the less accidents can happen within the company of good willing but unaware employees who just made a deal and is just not aware what they're doing. So the more standardization you have in terms and conditions and your contracting, the less likely that these things go wrong. So I fully acknowledge what you just said in there. One of the other
let me play up your point just there. Of course, not one size fits all, but that doesn't mean you have to do a fresh customization. What I do with Hot Docs automation, it works well with standardization, because suppose you get to paragraph 10, and there's really paragraph 10 has 3 common situations. Okay, with Hot Docs, for example, when you're going through the document, it will actually pop up a window saying, okay, choose one of these 3 clauses. So it kind of forces your brain to think about it, rather than having, write a document, hey, be careful here, you may have to customize.
It's actually the system that we used to have before everybody had a personal computer, because you had these checklists and you could do the tick box that you want the secretarial services to work out in the contract. Remember those days? I can remember.
I remember those days. You and I, peers, yes.
Yeah, I know that. That's exactly the same system, but then automated, so you can have no typos anymore in the text. It's much better. Yeah. I want to thank you a lot for your contribution. Hope to see you soon back on any of our interviews at cloud conferences to talk about the legal aspects. It's becoming, in my view, increasingly important in today's cryptocurrency and blockchain world, with basically the regulatory systems trying to catch us in situations that are not really fitting to our new developments and our new industry.
Right.
My general feeling about this, but that's a topic for next time, is that we should more go into a conceptual idea of what the appropriate meaning of our laws should be. And that great ties in with what Eric, you said. That's an appeal to being responsible and having ethical principles and not trying to sort of skip around the intentions that were originally made with the law. That would be a great thing to go about next time. I want to thank you a lot for attending, Gordon. I know you're extremely busy, so thank you so much for attending this conference. I really appreciate it. And, hope to see you soon and some possibility to make,
Thank you. And thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it. And it's good to see you.
Okay. See you soon, Gordon. Thank you so much.
Welcome to the Lightman Report. Every financial crisis is both a challenge and an opportunity for crypto. Need only real-time tracking, security, no single point of failure, and you consider the size of gaming and online gaming.
Let me go to the next speaker here. It's a well-known guest here. His name is Alex Lightman. I have the honor and the privilege of speaking with and to Alex on a weekly basis. Alex Leitman does fantastic analytical reports on a lot of things that engage within the blockchain space and the cryptocurrency space, but then with a very generic, broad economic global input. He's an enormous fact finder. He's got my enormous respect for that because, you know, he's a number cruncher and encyclopedia on economic results and figures and numbers. We need that in our space because it gives us a sound basis to look towards the future. His recent Leitman reports have great analysis on past, present, and future situations and things that touch upon our business. And one of the things that's extremely changed over the last couple of months is, of course, the new workplace. And that's what Alex is going to talk about today, that new workplace that puts us all at the kitchen table, the dining room table, next to the kids, or upstairs in the attic, or maybe we were already used to doing that work at home. Alex, fantastic that you could join today again. Thanks so much. And I'm really looking forward to your talk about the new workplace, because I think maybe 80 to 90% of the people in our, I would say our space of blockchain and cryptocurrencies and that sort of workspaces are now at home, grounded, tied down.
Yes. So should I start my talk?
Yes, please do. Thank you.
Hello to the people watching this. I hope that you've seen the Leitman reports and feel free to give me suggestions on what kind of topics that you'd like me to come up with. The recent ones about the past, present, and future of payments, of loans, the next ones on mortgages were suggested by our host, Annemieke Durkis. So thank you for that. I've really enjoyed researching and talking about that. I'd like to give a little context, big picture for global and also for the United States. I hope you don't mind if I talk about the United States because it's the country, I'm an American, I know well. Plus, it is in dollar terms the biggest economy in the world, and to some extent it's a proxy for the rest of the world. It's the biggest importer, and these are the up to the second numbers that you might be interested in. So the federal tax revenues per citizen in the United States right now is $7,000 per person. And if you look at that, then the national debt per citizen on the federal level of the United States government is $80,000 a person. So it'll take 11 years of tax payments on average to pay back the debt. But the debt per taxpayer, because there are only about 50 million net taxpayers, and that just got cut back, is $213,000 per taxpayer. So that's your share of the federal debt if you're a taxpayer. And the official budget deficit so far is $2.8 trillion. If you look at the amount of interest paid each year per adult in the United States, it's $15,000. And the savings per family is $23,000. The personal debt per person, this is in addition to the federal debt per person, is $62,000. So between the federal debt per citizen of $80,000 and the personal debt of $62,000, that's $142,000 per person. And if you combine the savings, the average person in the United States, even with all the employment, even with all the assets, is that the average person has negative net worth. Now, you might also be interested to know that in the United States right now, there are 18 million millionaires. And Jeff Bezos, at the time we recorded this just a couple days before, made in his net worth $13 billion in one day. And one person, when I put that on my Facebook page, said, which would be better, $13 billion for one person, and then he divided it up to, till it got to the point of $13,000 times all the number of people who would get that. And so one of the challenges that we have in the future of work is, how do we pay back the debt? How do we pay the interest? How do we be productive enough that we can pay this off? So let's look at the big picture. Right now, there are over 8 billion people in the world today. And depending on which statistics you look at, there are about 2 billion people who are employed out of that. But some people say it's only 1.2 billion. We've lost, because of COVID-19 and the shutdowns, about 400 million jobs in the world. So we might have as few as 800 million people working to support 8 billion people. Again, this is a crushing burden. And we have the problems, the big problems. Number one, how do we get through this COVID-19 shutdown? It's still going rampant around the world, and many countries are bragging that they've shut it down, New Zealand and others. But that's just because they haven't allowed normal travel. As soon as people start traveling again, it's going to kick up again. And those places which have it the worst, like Sweden and the United States, will have a little bit more immunity. We have this vaccine coming, but fundamentally, a lot of shifts that we had in commerce. So digital commerce, as you might have seen in the first Lightman report, was only 16% of retail last year, but it's accelerating. And so changes that normally would have been decades will happen in basically this year and next year. And so when you have people buying things online rather than stores, you're going to have a massive reduction of employment. So retail, restaurants are having a massive reduction in employment. Truck driving is going to have a massive reduction. Uber drivers, taxi drivers are going to have a massive reduction of employment. So the big challenge that we have with work is how do we create enough jobs? So there are basically four major areas that we can look at in the future of work: the changing nature of work, the fourth industrial revolution, the jobs and skills we want for the future, the COVID-19 impact on jobs, and a human-centric world of work. So what is work? Well, work is basically human skills applied to problems. And we as humans create value by applying our skills to solve problems in the world. And what's the changing nature of work in the fourth industrial revolution? Rapid technological progress increases the potential of boosting economic growth. And so we have all these new technologies, and they are all double-edged swords. So we have AI, which will create jobs and will give us more advice that we can get through our handy-dandy mobile phones, but they'll also take a lot of jobs. And robotics will create jobs, especially for people who work with robots, but will take jobs. 3D printing, which allows us to do a lot more things at home as long as we have the base materials. The Internet of Things, biotechnology, blockchain, all those things together are the fourth industrial revolution. And we need to have greater productivity growth. The reason I gave those statistics for the debt and for the interest at the beginning is to say that there is, no matter what we think, if we want to just chill out, governments are going to be setting policies in motion for the survival of their economies and the countries to create constant growth to try to pay back all that debt. And we also have a big shift, and it was already happening before that. So there are a lot of skills that are in decline. And you may be shocked to hear that the World Economics Forum Future of Jobs report wanted to know what it says, that four big things that are declining skills. Manual dexterity is declining. Management of financial and material resources is declining. And quality control is declining. Safety awareness is declining. These are long-term problems that we have. And then also the next generation skills include analytical thinking, innovation, emotional intelligence, creativity, and systems analysis. And if you look at what's happening, though, right now during the pandemic, all those things we're in cognitive retreat. So what the screen time for students in the United States and in many other places that are in lockdown has increased 500%. And so people are they're viewing TikTok, they're just in kind of receive mode from their mobile phones, which are with them all the time. And what we see is a decline in the number of hours spent learning, decline in vocabulary, declining words written. You can actually count how many words per day people type. By the way, people use a keyboard 120 times a day, and they type out 1,200 words, but that's in decline too. We're writing less and we're just receiving more. Also, a big problem, men are about 5% more than women at birth, but men die sooner. So as we start, I've talked about problems, but here I'll start to talk about a little bit of a solution. How do we add GDP growth? Well, if you can basically have the countries in the world match the best performing country in their region for gender parity. So you find the African country with the best percentage of women in the workforce, and the best Latin American country, the best North American country, European, et cetera. If you basically reach that, if other countries reach that, we would add 12 trillion to GDP in just 5 years. And global GDP is about 80 trillion a year. So we get to about 92 trillion, but we have to subtract from that, 5-6 trillion for COVID. But we can recover quite a lot from COVID. We can more than recover from COVID if we had women fully participating in the workforce and not be discriminated against. We also have cultural, social, economic, environmental, and technological changes. And a World Economic Forum study said that 2/3 of today's kindergarten students will have occupations that currently don't exist. So we have to go through this kind of Darwinian loss of jobs to gain new ones. And the economists have a name for it. It's very simple: churn, CHURN. So we're going to have to be experiencing that. We have a gap in the digital environment between what it takes to work on the jobs that are open and for hire and what people's skills are. They need adaptability and resilience. They need learning and creativity and innovation. They need to collaborate and communicate online. And they need to have commercial thinking with business acumen, kind of like my friend Gordon was just talking about. You have to understand contracts and DocuSign and all of this kind of stuff, which are not being taught in schools. And we also are having an agricultural driven revolution. Robots can come in with precision agriculture and replace human beings there too. This is especially going to be hitting Africa very, very hard. And we have a lot of automation coming into the workplace. This is a huge challenge. So one thing that we are going to see is we're going to see that certain jobs are going to be replaced by AI and robots, insurance claims adjusters, and fast food people. These are the kind of jobs that are going to be like 95% replaced. The highest percentage of robots in the world per capita are in Korea. They have about 5 robots per 100 workers, and the United States has about 1.6. Globally, there's 2/3 of a robot for every 100 people. So basically, there's 1 robot for every 130 people in the world. China has about half the world average. China has about 1/3 of a robot per 100 people. It may seem like China is automating. It's not very automated at all. Now, the top big job sectors of the future, number 1 is data and artificial intelligence, machine learning, deep learning, data science. Number 2 is care professions, healthcare. And this is, if you look at the United States as sort of a harbinger, in the United States, you have over 2/3 of the people are overweight and over 1/3 are obese. And according to projections that I have done myself, that year 2064 is a year when everybody in the world will be obese if you continue the current trends. I know that may sound horrifying, but just look at how fast it's going. So we're going to have an enormous increase in healthcare, because when you become obese, you have an 800% increase in getting diabetes. And if you get a diagnosis of diabetes mellitus type 2, you get 15 years taken off your average life expectancy. And this is showing up in the data, along with drug overdoses and suicides. These 3 things combined are resulting in, for the last 3 years, after 120 years declining average life expectancy. I pretty much guarantee you, I've done the math, that this year we'll see a continuation of average life expectancy in the US decline, and we'll see it again next year. So we'll have a good 5 years in a row of average declining life expectancy. Meanwhile, healthcare costs are going up. They were $13,500 last year, and there'll be more this year, and there'll be much more next year. So the third thing after data and care is engineering, new programming languages, cloud computing. Then you have green tech, renewables. You have sales, digital marketing, and content. Then you have medical technology, biotech, genetic engineering as a category. You have people in 9 job sectors. 5 out of the 9 are all pretty much related to computers. And then you have online education, which is also one of these areas. Now, the demand for IT jobs is very high, but we don't have the skills base and the education base to keep doing this. And the fastest growing occupational groups for the future are healthcare support, personal care and service, computers and math. Occupational groups for the rest of the decade are related to healthcare. And we have kind of a singularity for the future of work that's sped up by the pandemic. with the outbreak of coronavirus and its spread around the world, the demand side of work has shrunk, and all the problems that we need to solve have come up. We are now facing instead the need to focus on the much bigger, more immediate problem of keeping people alive and keeping them sane as they go crazy from being in lockdown or getting their jobs lost. So tens of millions of people are out of work, and they're just the ones that are being counted. 400 million people who've lost their jobs in the last few months. It's like a cry of anguish you can hear. Imagine 400 million people screaming, I need a job. And there are also all these people with seasonal or gig jobs or in the informal economy who don't have work too because of that. So there are enormous numbers of jobs at risk as a result of COVID-19. And you basically see this collapse of the number of hours worked. So talking about productivity, the number of hours worked is plummeted. And we've now seen work go down by about 16% because of that. And as a result, in the US right now, we have about 11% unemployment. The lowest rate is in Kentucky with 4.3% unemployed. The highest rate is in Massachusetts with 17%. And New York, New Jersey, California, big states have 14% unemployment. It's enormous. And you have more than 30 million people who filed for unemployment in the US. And a lot of these people are going to lose their federal support for their benefits at the end of August. And so a lot of people who've been just getting along just fine. So it's my own belief as we talk about the future of work that we're going to see a crash in the minimum pay for job hourly pay. It's going to probably drop by half to get full employment back again. Full employment is seen as 4%. And we also see, I think we're going to have to see real estate average house price crash about half too before we get out of this. So I'm now going to finish off with one kind of way of looking at work. A lot of people talk about universal basic income. I think the father of this was Buckminster Fuller. He said that we should pay people just for being human. And rather than paper checks administered, the future of money can have built-in universal basic income automatically allocated to your crypto wallet with a fixed rate that can't be changed. And right now, what we've spent is $500 billion blank check to corporations. That's as a $2 billion coronavirus relief package, $174 billion in tax breaks for the super rich. That's helping the Jeff Bezoses, and Elon Musk is now worth $75 billion at the time we recorded this. A one-time $1,200 check for working Americans. And basically one person has characterized it, Robert Reich, as more socialism for the rich and harsh capitalism for the rest. But universal basic income has arrived in some forms. Rapid economic and social development has created new public goods. The internet, free education and valuable content on YouTube and Coursera, etc. Social commitments, global security. These are all kind of free goods that are happening. And the big challenge that we have now is how do we have the serendipity of people running into each other, like Mark Zuckerberg running into Sean Parker, who knew Peter Thiel, and getting the funded, which created this roughly $1 trillion company of Facebook, and all these people running into each other because they're face to face. As we go into this work world, it's very hard for that serendipity to happen. So ultimately, if we have to say the future of work, it's a lot of it at home. We have to pioneer new productive methods. We're going to see governments squeezing as much cash out of people as possible, and a lot of people wanting to move, needing to move, but not being able to from the lockdown. And that's my talk for today.
That was very, very interesting, Alex. And I must say, some of the numbers you just mentioned are just mind-boggling. You know, if you come to realize what an enormous change this rapid impact of the pandemic has made on the workplace, it makes you wonder why we haven't noticed more hitting the wall in Q3 with all these people coming off federal benefits. I mean, if I hear you about the future and about this Darwinian, I would always say species get extinct when there is no, no space for them to survive anymore. You know, in nature, we complain about the dodo being disappeared. We complain about all sorts of species in the animal kingdom that disappear because of various reasons. Sounds a little bit to me like some of the human species are going to be extinct as well. Capabilities to adjust to the new work environment worldwide. Because if you don't pick up the internet and try to either learn a new skill, get a capability to do whatever, and you belong to the species that was, employed before the pandemic, you're now going to be not employed anymore, and you have to act. It's your responsibility to be aware of the fact that your skills are no longer employable, which
Yeah.
is a hard shock.
Well,
because it was-
my own
yeah.
feeling is that I showed these debt numbers in part because governments are going to fall. They cannot increase their taxes so much because they can't keep their citizens locked up for that much longer. And even when you keep them locked up, people can use corporations and other ways around it. So you can't squeeze so much from a stone when there's other places people can migrate to if they have skills. And so just as soon as we get a little bit farther along in this COVID thing, you are going to have countries trying to attract these knowledge workers who can work remotely. Because as soon as you can work from home, you can work from anywhere and then fly in with the difference that you have in the savings. And we will see a number of failed states. Failed states are those that are unable to provide for the security of the people living there. And we're seeing failed cities. I would call Portland and Minneapolis, I would call them failed cities. And people are not going to want to live there. Within the first week of the police station burning down in Minneapolis, 17.7% of all the homes went on the market. They went online, and we can measure these things. Now, if you're thinking about buying a home, you're not going to buy it where 17% of the whole city just got dumped online. The prices will crash. And you might think in Europe, because Europe is really stable, well, how low can the homes go? Well, I can tell you, in San Francisco, the average home is about or Palo Alto, San Francisco, it's about $1.8 million per home. And it might even be more in Palo Alto. It's 1.8 million in San Francisco. And in Detroit, last time I looked, there were homes that you couldn't sell for $5,000. Now, they're not the same home, but the fact is that you have a lot of homes for sale at $5,000, because when people abandon a city, when you have this massive outflow of people, housing prices plunge. And 500,000 people have already left New York, which had a population of about 8 million people. And New York was looking really good. I've spent a lot of time there for work purposes, and murder rate up 250%. And so basically, my dear friend Taylor, she has predicted that the downtowns are going to be, big cities are going to be turned into anarchy zones where there's just a pullback of government security services. And then you're going to have what happened across Asia and Europe in the age of the Mongols. You had 200 years of Mongol raids that unified Asia and made the largest empire. But either you had a walled city with good archers, or you were basically subject to raids that could destroy all of your capital accumulation. China was subject to Mongol raids for 200 years.
I sincerely hope that we can postpone this moment a little bit longer. And I think one of the things that you pointed out was that the information technology, IT as a general field, has now made information direct and accessible for, I would say, ordinary civilians, where in the past, they depended on, scarce, some TV maybe, radio, some newspaper, but now the information from the bottom up goes viral just like that. Eric sort of had an appeal and responsibility on information on the ethical side of it. But one of the other major points coming from that fact that we are also makes us being much more responsive as a people than we ever were before towards governments. I think if they could, it's less likely to be manipulated. You saw that in Minneapolis with the house sales. You see it in Europe in various instances. The response from, I would say, society towards the government that's not doing their job is much more immediate, I think, than it ever was, which puts a burden on the responsibility of large firms like Facebook, like Google, like all these institutions, but also on corporations. I mean, look what happened to cars that, fake their reports on exhaust, what comes out of their cars. Look at big corporations that do things. In the end, it'll catch up with you. So I think our immediate response on some tax evasions, for instance, in the UK of a very famous coffee firm, were that British people just called out not to buy it anymore. They immediately changed their policy. We would have, 20 years ago, we would have known that. There was no internet, there was no information. So I think it works both ways. The information comes up real fast. We can respond as a society much faster. And on the other hand, it's a large demand on us to go in this information technology space to better ourselves, to be more adaptable, to learn, to school ourselves. I think that is one of the most fundamental changes in society that I've seen over the last 10 to 15 years develop in a rapid speed. And I think this pandemic has increased it tenfold. At least that's what I take away from what you just said. It's my sort of general takeaway from what you said. We'll talk a lot more about this new workplace, certainly in Q3 in your Lightman reports that we do listen to on a weekly basis. It's very, very interesting because it's the first time that a major worldwide situation that we have now, the information is directly coming into society and enables us to do something with it. And we demand also from our governments to give us this information about vaccines, about numbers, about all sorts of ratings. In that thing, information technology, I'm going to go to our next speaker who is in this field of information technology, and that's Vincent Molinari. I have to see whether I have my video on. Yes, I do. Vincent Molinari is in FinTech TV. He is in this field of information technology and is one of our, I would say, new ways of informing us that comes directly from society, not by governments, not by general institutions. I think, Vince, welcome. Great to see you back. I think it's one of the key elements that we just talked about, first of all, society responding way up to governments instead of the other way around, where it was like 50 years ago, where it's much more directive. And I would say that you're one of the enablers of informing the public and having direct access to all sorts of information corners that we never used to have. So Vince is going to talk today about that digital transformation and what a dramatic effect it's going to have. And if I just go back to what Alex was referring to, in Q3, we're going to have a massive impact in the financial industry when people come off federal support in the USA. It will be a major milestone. I mean, I can't even imagine what a shift that's going to be. You're a key person in that space. I'm really looking forward to how you see this subject developing.
Wow. Annemieke, thank you so much. And as always, far, far too kind in your generous introduction, but thank you.
You're way too modest, Vince. You're way too modest. You're a global FinTech TV station now.
Wow. Look, and I did listen to your wonderful conversation with Alex, and I think it is at that tipping point. And when we talk about digital transformation and today's conversation, digital transformation in finance, it is the digital transformation itself, that access, that level of transparency, the level to disseminate information to corners of the world that we never imagined before. Not only that, the speed in which we do it. And I think if we think about Moore's law for a moment, right? This is, we're really at that intersection where the computing power, the levels of computing power, the cost reduction and the access to that computing power is really coming to itself and manifesting in position in time in COVID, whether we've fully realized the extent of it or not yet, has accelerated this far, far greater than would have been without COVID. And that's availability to information. It's going to be payment mechanisms. It's going to be our financial infrastructure. And again, I think when you talk about this Q3 support of government stimulus or government survival packages, as they may be, go away, it is going to be a major jolt to the system. So what's transpired here? What's gone on? I think we have a level of recognition, blockchain, cryptography, digitization, on a global scale is being embraced versus being shunned. Our early days of having to have regulators and legislators, not just here in the US, but globally, understand that blockchain cryptography is here to stay, and it's part of the evolution of our financial markets, our capital markets, and it is going to be embedded into the very fabric of many mechanisms, from identity to compensation structures to supply chain transparency. So this digital transformation is really creating, I think, this systemic change or change to systems that we haven't thought about on scale, or certainly the scale that we have at hand today. So I think there's so much to touch on, but I think it starts as I think indicated earlier, when you have content. Why did we start with content? The education and awareness, what we'll call actionable knowledge, to put forth in a, dare I say, democratized access to content, and the democratization of creation of transparent stories, information, and data, without this digital transformation, without this understanding and acceptance of technology solutions in our society. So when you start from a bottom-up approach, it's allowed us at FinTech TV to do things that I couldn't have imagined, of scaling on a globalized basis in the continent of Africa, to India, to Abu Dhabi, the US, UK, soon to be the Nordics, on being able to amplify stories of people, places, things that are innovative, that are adhering to the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN, the SDGs, to bring forward some of the biggest challenges that we have in our societies, in humanity, on our planet, on our financial service systems, our financial lack of inclusion, the access to capital to reaches in parts of our societies that didn't have fair access. So the compounding fact of, when you have this content being consumed, what is the machine learning, the artificial intelligence, the levels of technological innovation, the fourth industrial revolution type technologies that are part and parcel of understanding and receiving signals of this content consumption? The ability to then say individual identity, individual wallets, individuals' sovereignty of information can now be shared. They can choose who they want to share that with, to organizations, companies that they believe in, that they trust, and in fact now be compensated for that, versus having that taken from them or in creative ways usurped from them and other people making that. So I think that's one really important part of the evolution that we're seeing here in this rapid progression to transformation of digitization. Now, when you think about that, the opportunities, what those signals start to tell you, who's consuming that content and what do they care about? We're not being told what they should care about, but what pockets of fan bases, diaspora communities, affinity groups care about a certain initiative, again, whether that's gender equality, whether it's carbon reduction, clean oceans, or traditional finance mechanisms, that we now have this signal that they're consuming content based upon that, while matching investment opportunities in a rapid framework that adhere to those core values of those individuals, organizations, wealth managers, etc. So I think you're going to see more product creation that is a financial instrument, that is being generated by the bottom up, the demand side of the investment community. And to do that in a way that is, again, transparent because of our technology and our transformation to markets. I think what's perhaps materially different today than just 2 years ago and even a year ago is regulatory and legislative understanding that this phenomenon of cryptography, blockchain, and what other future technology, we won't even begin to talk about quantum computing, but what does that mean, and the benefit to access to capital, to enabling entrepreneurs, SMEs, our growth, our innovators to access capital on one hand, and the other side of that is the opportunity for others, individuals, to wealth create in mechanisms that they didn't previously have access to. So I think these new distribution channels that begin to embed social media, levels of symmetry of information that was not available before when we think about private or unregistered securities, because there was not an infrastructure, there was not best practices as perhaps we have in some of our public markets, where there's continuity of that information, symmetry of information to all investors, so there is levels of fair play. When you then think about how do you create access to liquidity using these instruments, so that what do we all ask ourselves in many instances before we invest? What is my exit before I even invest? So the advent of secondary trading platforms, alternative trading systems that are incorporating digitization. So I think the one big gating factor to talk about that has been the difficult part of adoption, certainly here in the US, has been the question of custody. And what does custody mean in a digital instrument? And what does that mean historically? Because in most cases, an unregistered security or a private security, you never had the question around custody because they weren't held in a traditional custody mechanism. It was in a file cabinet or a spreadsheet or with a corporate secretary. So I think now the last year or so of advocacy with the regulators to begin to understand roles of perhaps of transfer agents, of custody in new ways, embedding digitization, that we'll see more adoption of security instruments. And I think one of the beauties of a smart contract, smart security, is the ability to be able to construct that in ways, revenue share opportunities, royalties, income streams, equity, or combinations of those. So I think those newer instruments will be driven again from the bottom up, the demand side of what is coming forward by signals. And then I think if you overlay on top of that, what rapidly becomes the ability to cross border as certain regulatory regimes or geographies are comfortable with mechanisms or standardization, I think you begin to see greater flows of capital over time. And I think over time is the operative word here. I think so much about technology globally is well in advance of the acceptance by regulators or financial markets. So it's kind of where we were yesterday, where we are today, and where we're going in the future. And understanding that the movement of securities or capital have to adhere to regulatory permissioning. So much better today than we were a year or two ago, but I think where we're going to go in the next 1 to 5 years with this will be embedded into certainly our unregistered security markets and beginnings of our public markets and adaptation of infrastructure of our traditional financial services. And then I think the other part to bring forward is really this rapid movement to central bank digital currencies, stablecoin, and where that is going to change the very trajectory of settlement processes within financial services, where that's perhaps going to change payment systems globally when we look at different stablecoins and central bank digital currencies and their role in both issuing debt, perhaps issuing what could be surplus packages the way they are today, but also on a retail level, the settlement and transaction processing perhaps being more efficient embedding these. And you're starting to see a rapid race, if you will, I think, globally to more governments moving toward a central bank digital currency framework that could indeed begin to change how GDP is affected and global settlement transactions of major foreign trade. So I think that as this all continues to unfold, the world of digital and the digital transformation is perhaps just in the early days or early innings of a massive global or planetary shift towards digital transformation. So, sorry, try to hit on a few things, Annemieke. Happy to continue, but I don't want to go over in the time allotment.
No, I'm very happy of what you told us about the latest developments. My line is breaking up sometimes, so I'm really, really sorry about that. I hope you can hear me fine. I think one of the most interesting things that you brought forward is actually that bit about, I would say, digitalized responsibility. It's in the ethical sense of having the right values, and in a digitized space being able to have that, I would say, affirmative, creating assets, like settlements, like payments. It ties in wonderful in what Eric said about having an appeal for ethics. Gordon going in the corner of saying, well, you need some legal paperwork in order to make sure that you don't run into trouble with people who have less ethical thoughts than you do. And then, you got Alex, talking about the huge shift we're going to have in the workplace. And then you come with, I would say, exactly the closing argument, which is the digitization of this whole space, which is going to dramatically change our world. So I want to thank you a lot for contributing to this page. I can't hear you at the moment. I'm really sorry about that, but the connection is horrible. I hope that everybody else can. I want to thank you so much for attending here with FinTech TV. Hope to see you shortly to talk some more about the changes in the individual spaces worldwide, like Southeast Asia, where changes are very different from the United States at the moment, especially if services are remote, like financial inclusion. I would say sustainable development goals have a lot to do with financial inclusion. So really looking forward to that. Our next speaker is Sebastian van der Lans. He's Dutch, but he is one of the people who's responsible for WordProof. It's a timestamping, completely new development which delivers remarkable usability to users worldwide in securing all sorts of data and documents. So I want to leave the floor to him. He is Dutch, so he's sort of around the corner. Sebastian, most welcome to the show. I'll leave the floor to you, and we're really looking forward for you to explain what WordProof, and he's not going to say it himself, but this month they've won a very important prize from the European Union in Brussels and have been recognized for their outstanding performance out there. And I want to just name one remarkable thing. All the contestants got 2 minutes, and they all did pitches, and they were the only one onboarding and performing within the 2 minutes completely live. Well, that takes courage, guys. So welcome, Sebastian. The floor is yours.
Annemieke, thank you so much. Is the sound okay?
Yes, it's fine.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. It's such a pleasure to be on the show, and thanks for the amazing introduction. I'll tell a bit on WordProof, 15 to 20 minutes, and after that we have some Q&A. So go deep in asking any questions you want.
Thank you.
My name is Sebastian. I'll start with a short pitch, then I do 3 or 4 use cases, and then we have the discussion. What we say is the internet has a deep-rooted issue, and it's trust. Many, at least Europeans, but it's broader, it's all around the world, it's from the Ipsos research, are suspicious of the internet, and 86% says that they have fallen for fake news themselves. This causes fewer online purchases, people using fake IDs, and a decreasing usage of the internet. And we say the internet is built on the fundamentally insecure rails. And what our mission really is to bring a layer of trust over the internet. What I read is real, and I can verify who wrote it. What I create is mine, and I have the proof, and I'm protected and leveraged in disputes, for example, in e-commerce. This should be true for content, social, commerce, and every other corner of the internet. So that's what we do at WordProof. And we are not just a simple tool to timestamp, but we work on a whole holistic timestamp ecosystem. We implement blockchain in a way that everyone can use it easily. So for example, we started with a WordPress plugin working on 38% of all the websites on the web. And we have an API for all other kind of platforms, the Shopify, but also the enterprise platforms. Then there's a big thing for identity. That's what you see on top in the ecosystem. We work with multi-signature timestamps. So for example, when you're publishing as a CEO, you can say communication department, you can say the legal department, all involved in the same timestamps. And we're working with the self-sovereign identity movement from the W3 consortium. We combine both in the ecosystem. And on the bottom, you see a layer of education. And what we really aim to do, and that was one of the things in Europe as well, everyone said, oh, we made our own standard for adoption. But what we do at WordProof is we try to build a unique, global, inclusive timestamp ecosystem, but we especially focus on integrating with existing standards. So for example, we are working on ISO standard. We are working with schema.org. Schema.org is the way how search engines and social media interpret data. I'll talk on that a bit later with the examples. And Dublin Core, that's a standard enforced by many governments on how data should be structured on websites. And on the right, you see advocacy. We do a lot of, talking with legislation, how a timestamp stands, for example, in court. So the ecosystem is, there's a fundament with standardization, but not our standardization, but with integration with existing standards. In just a year, to give some numbers, we did over 200,000 timestamps. The timestamp certificates, I'll show them later, are showed over on over 90 million page views, for example, from the biggest Dutch publishers. So that are quite impressive numbers. And what we think drivers for adoptions are, for example, 70 or 67% of those with knowledge of blockchain. They encourage that blockchain will be widely adopted. And for example, it's a number from Europe, and I don't know the Chinese numbers or the US numbers of that, but 85% of at least Europeans support education, for example, on fake news. So that's one of the things, if you see the blockchain certificate, the timestamp certificate that we are spreading on over the 90 million page views, education is really a big part of it. The business model, simple as it is, we have open source. That's with your blockchain wallet. You can do it yourself. And there's a software as a service to timestamp on your behalf. So for journalists or enterprise or any form of organizations, that's a way to timestamp automatically on every publishing, on every update, or when an e-commerce order is made. And there are partnership programs, so hosting companies, for example, all kinds of partners sign up. Transparency and accountability lead to a more trustworthy internet. That's our firm belief. And the timestamp ecosystem, it tackles a lot of the issues that we face today in the world. So what we can do as big and small organizations, in a way we can fight resistance of tech giants, we can decrease the impact of fake news, we can bring blockchain into the daily life of inhabitants of the planet Earth, billions of them, and it offers a playing field in case of disputes in e-commerce or wherever. It makes things easier to prove. And with WordProof and the multi-signature and the identity solutions that are developed all around the ecosystem, we can work towards a fixed internet, because what we always say is, let's fix the broken web together. That was kind of a 5-minute introduction in WordProof. I'll talk a bit on the technology, and then we go briefly through 4 use cases. What you see here on the bottom, and we'll check it later, is the timestamp certificate. So for example, on a product page or a publisher page, you can see, hey, the content hasn't been changed since the last timestamp, and you can wander through all the revisions of the content. And here on the bottom, what you can see is, as a consumer, you can, for example, compare revisions with each other, see how content changed over time. And here on the right, you see some statistics. So the 90 million page views with a blockchain timestamp certificate, and the unique timestamps, the conferences, stuff like that. And here, one of the things that started the idea of WordProof is, in 5 years from now, If you don't timestamp your articles on the blockchain, you're going to be considered a fraud. What are you hiding? So that's the idea. That's where we see this going in the coming 5 years. Every content should have been, there should have been taken accountability for any content on the web. What is a timestamp? Interestingly, blockchain got a lot of attention with Bitcoin. Bitcoin, the white paper was published in 2008, but in the Bitcoin white paper, there's a reference, and the reference is to 1991, and by Stuart Haber and Mrs. Scott Stranetta. They invented the blockchain, and the blockchain was invented in 1991 for one single thing, and it was proving the integrity of documents, of content. And what we do at WordProof is nothing more than the initial use case of blockchain, timestamping, and then we bring it to public-facing content. Example number one is a publisher. And the idea is simple. In the last years, there's a trend that every publisher or many publishers, they say, hey, last changed 2 hours ago. And we, as consumers, we tend to say, wow, that's transparent. You are even telling us when it changed. But it could also make you suspicious. What was there 2 hours ago that I'm not allowed to see anymore? So when we do media things for mainstream media, always the thing I always ask the listener is, if you're curious, what was there 2 hours ago, just send an email to the journalist and ask them if you can see what the revisions were. Journalists, not all journalists like me anymore, but it happens a lot in the Netherlands. And what we say is every content that impacts life. So for example, health content, political content, but in fact, every business content, the terms and conditions, if it impacts lives, consumers deserve it, that they can see how the content changed over time, if there has been tampered with the data, and who is the sender of the data. One of the things you as well, and we put a lot of time in with the blockchain identity. So a timestamp without identity has a lot of value, but once you tie identity to it, it's really a way that a consumer, a reader, a buyer can check where does that information come from. In e-commerce, for example, the product terms, products develop over time, and marketers try to make it as beautiful as possible. If you have the multi-signature timestamp, ask the manufacturer to co-sign the information of the product, for example. If you do stuff like that, you can make a totally verifiable chain for readers, for buyers, for everyone involved. This is what it looks like. So you see an article. On the bottom, you click on a link. There you see the timestamp certificate. And you can click on a revision, select different revisions. And there you see, really in Git style, green is new, what is red is deleted. So you can really see over time. We call it the time machine, the content time machine. And some publishers, they give this transparency already. But what we think, or we're sure, and we're contributing a lot. That's one of the things we use the prize money for, the million, for education, educating audiences and businesses around the world that they should be demanding. If content changes your life, impacts your life, you should demand transparency. E-commerce, I touchly briefed it. So for example, if you buy a product, you can say, hey, it has product terms, it has terms and conditions, the product information itself. Maybe you can if you timestamp all that information, you buy it, something breaks, but it's in the warranty time, and you go back to the merchant. What you can see is, hey, but what happens a lot is over time, the product terms changed or the terms and conditions changed. And what happened there is, as a consumer, you're totally reliant on the willingness of the merchant if they're willing to help you, because there's no way to prove what really the terms were. With timestamping, it strengthens the position of the buyer, but also of the seller, because they can prove that in a lot of disputes, 3 to 5% of all disputes or of all transactions in e-commerce result in some form of disputes, and many of them have trust problems in proving what was the deal at the moment of buying and the moment of selling. So timestamping solves a lot in e-commerce, especially with the multi-sign when a manufacturer can co-sign. Copyright. Small example. This is creative studio in Amsterdam. And I give a small example because it's powerful for small, but it applies to big as well. In copyright, this is a small web shop from Amsterdam. They create wonderful lamps and wonderful content to sell the lamps. It's all handcrafted. They're working with 8 people, but it's a small company. They make beautiful products, sell them all over the world. But what happens a lot, people copy their content and publish it on their own website to sell, and they copy the products as well. But for example, on eBay, on the biggest one of the biggest selling platforms, and they are a small team. Everyone is focused on creating the product, creating the content, but they don't have a legal team. So when they see that their content is copied, they have a lot of work in collecting data. They have to hire a lawyer to protect themselves and write a letter. So they tried several times to write a letter to eBay, but it didn't work out. They didn't get down the copycat. But with the timestamps, they started timestamping. And what happened was they saw there was another infringement. They went to the My Word Proof environment. They said, hey, this is where the copy is. Create a letter. It's all automated because it's so easy. It's all automatically collected, the data with timestamping. And in a matter of less than 2 or 3 minutes, they created a letter. They sent it to eBay, and more than 4 times in less than 1 hour, the copycat was taken down. What does this do? In a way, it democratizes the legal protection. They weren't able to afford themselves any form of protection, but for now they are. For less than 1 hour of a lawyer fee a year, they have a protection of all their products. And that's a small example. We prove in a way that small matters, but also for the big stuff. For example, we talked with the biggest television show producer. They do a format, and it's called The Voice of Holland, The Voice all around the world. The Voice, they have enough money to protect the big shows because that are productions of tens of millions. But they do online content as well. And that content is too volatile or too cursory to protect or to bring to a notary. It's timely, it's costly, it doesn't work out. But with timestamping, they can even protect their online content with a blockchain timestamp. So that's the copyright use case. Let's move on to the last one. The one I enjoy the most. And in whatever industry you are, this one is mind-blowing to me. And it's search engine optimization. What does a blockchain hash, blockchain timestamp has to do with search? That's an interesting question. In search engines, there are a lot of problems. One of them is changing the date. If you write an article, and everyone who regularly publishes on the internet knows this, if you just change the date of an article, you rank higher in the search engine for at least a few days. And a few days later, your position goes down, but it helps to just change the date. Does Google want that? Of course not, because it's not a level playing field. If you don't do it and your competitor does it, you have a disadvantage. So one of the problems that search engines have is that they're not able to check this. That's changing the date. But another one is duplicated content. If you have a search engine and you have content published and the same content gets republished a few days after, then maybe the search engine ranks the content that's published later, because that's a better indexed site, and will penalize the small website that was originally the one who published it. With a timestamp, you can prove that you didn't tamper with the date. And what we do at WordProof is we make sure that not only humans can read the timestamp certificate, but also search engines. How do we do that? Interesting question. There's a language, and the language is called schema.org. Via Schema, you can explain to a search engine and to social media that you did what content is. So Sebastian is not just a word, but it's my first name. WordProof is not just a word, but it's the name of the company where Sebastian works. With schema.org, you can exactly tell to a search engine what a word means. And what we're working on is explaining in schema.org the timestamp, where they can find it, how the identity is tied to it, and in the duplicated content, who was first, and if there's duplicate content, if it's allowed to be copied or not. And are we doing this alone? Of course we aren't doing this alone. Timestamping is a movement, and we work together with the people at Yoast. Yoast, everyone who works with WordPress recognizes that name. Yoast and the team, it's Joost Valk and Jona Alderson, they designed the implementation of schema.org for 11 million websites on the web. That's around 5 or 6% of all the websites, and so it's massive. Together with them, we are designing how timestamps should be interpreted by search engines and social media. So with them on board in the community, we have the best possible way to define, but also to make sure that adoption will be next. So that would be my call to all of you. The lobby is at full force, both at the governments, European Commission, for example, as at search engines. Once search engines recognize the open way of showing your integrity, thus with blockchain timestamps, it makes sense that you were among the first who did it. You can see it as buying a really great domain name in the early days of the internet. If they recognize the timestamps by the moment they do, and they won't promise that they do, of course, because they never say what ranking factors are. Once they do, it made sense that you already did your timestamps today. So that would be the last part of inspiration. If you can timestamp today, do it. And yeah, that would be my call. Start timestamping today, whether you're a publisher, a web shop, if you do any liable content in any enterprise or organization, if you care about transparency, fighting fraud, albeit just for the search engine optimization, start timestamping today, and let's fix the broken web together. Back to you, Annemiek.
It's a remarkable speech you just held about WordProof. You know, I'm a fan of timestamping for the sheer purpose of honesty towards the users, honesty, transparency, and trust towards content. We all know that fake news has created tremendous problem in some areas in the world, like fake Facebook news has in the past created even genocides in Africa. As to the extent that the authorities saw themselves obliged to shut down the internet to avoid any further escalation. So, you know, even in the news sector, I think everybody can recognize you don't like fake news. You want to be known the truth. You don't want to get advertised in this realm, even Bitcoin stuff from people who have got nothing to do with it and lie to you all the way. Recently, we had a Twitter hack on some very famous people like Elon Musk and other people. I mean, I don't fall for these things because, you know, when you read it, it's too good to be true. But usually things that are too good to be true for newbies will still attract. And, you know, some people get conned by that. I actually want to take it into the real business realm because that interested me highly. Because when we talk supply chain is one of the most difficult areas to tackle with blockchains, because most blockchains will do it with an RFID, will do it with the packaging of the product. And we never went to the owner of the package, nor to the owner of the product itself. You know, when you have two farms that produce oranges in Spain, and the one is biologically responsible, the other one is full with pesticides, how can you tell? You know, you have to believe what's what's being told about it. I know from the numbers that 20% worldwide of the offered stuff in the bio sector is 20% more than is actually produced. So there is fraud there. So I think providence seems to me highly attractive. That if you got these certificates and these documents that have a follow-up on the product with a multi-sig situation, that this would be an extreme new way of tackling this over the blockchain without any governmental organization whatsoever. I, as a consumer,
Yep.
is the right view? I'm seeing that correctly, right?
Yeah, and actually that ties in with the example I used of a manufacturer who timestamps the product terms. So you can imagine buying at we have Albert Heijn in the Netherlands, but it can be Walmart, can be Kmart, can be anything, that you can see.
We say WordProof is a Dutch product. That's why I know well. It's an internationally recognized product, but also Yoast, which is a worldwide marketing organization, is also Dutch. So,
yeah, absolutely.
Dutch item here. No, exactly. I think food provenance is very important to us these days.
And what I expect is that, for example, on a web shop of a grocery shop, you can see the farmer co-sign the batch of pineapples or the batch of oranges.
Do you see that as something that could be in print on the packaging? Like you could have, I don't know, maybe a link or something there that as a consumer, I could just aim my phone on it, like I could scan it and I could see, oh, yeah, right, I can see the whole trail. Would that be something in the future?
In a way, yes. In a way, no. The hard thing is that there's a market in stickers for oranges. So it's hard to make sure that the sticker is really the one that belong on. It would be better if there's an app, not for facial recognition, but for orange recognition. I think that's where we're going.
So let's go to the other more tangible stuff where we don't need the packaging, and that's very, I would say, in the decentralized blockchain area of finance.
Yeah.
Let's say we go into the area that's growing tremendously, that's peer-to-peer lending. We all know that in the banking sector, for the small, mid-size, it's a big problem to get loans. Peer-to-peer lending, we just learned on the library report last week that it's an enormous growth sector.
Yeah.
How do you see that in the development of something like WordProof? It seems to me like there's a big role for all these stages.
So, for example, every purchase, every transaction, especially in the places where there's no inclusion financially yet, starts with education. And where there's not enough education, misinformation is a risk. We saw that with COVID. The misinformation literally cost lives to people who are educated. What can you expect from a world where lending as a concept is new? Education is so important there. With timestamping, you can make the whole process before you lend transparent, and you can make you can democratize the access to information to make sure that everyone understands the terms of a loan. Because often when you get your first loan ever in a world where you didn't know that you could have got one, hey, there's money. What shall I do with it? So with
what I'm going at, we've got 3.2 billion people. Sorry about that, in the world underbanked, or at least have very, very limited access to the financial world, which means that development is extremely hard. Africa, South America, Southeast Asia, many areas in the world suffer from this, basically because there's no banking office. They all got a phone. So are you saying that we should see this peer-to-peer lending on the blockchain, which is a growing sector, that we could have like a timestamp in front that first say, did you actually read the small print? Do you know what you're getting into? Is that
that's A? That's A, and B is to make sure that the terms and conditions for those loans are easily understandable and transparent. How did that change over time? And thirdly, what can happen is, if it's about funding, you have lending, but also funding. So, for example, sending money in that direction. If there's enough trust that the money is spent well or in the right way, people are maybe more willing to invest in places like that. So it's a great way to build trust with investors from other places as well.
Yeah, we discussed just recently last week that if you prove with your digital identity or your verifiable pseudonym that you're apparently somebody who pays back as agreed into the peer-to-peer lending situation, that you create, as how it were, more credibility to your avatar, your digital identity, or whatever. All these names are sort of down to the very basic, that I create something online that's actually me, but it doesn't need to look like me or doesn't need to be named me. So if we use like something like WordProof to timestamp that, then actually the timestamp could be meaning like I met with my agreements, I did exactly what I was supposed to be doing. So do you see in that sense that WordProof could add to, I would say, the security of the next one who will want to do business with this digital identity?
I think so, because with timestamps, you can A, show that you didn't tamper, B, take accountability. Both the borrower as the lender, it's for anyone, they can prove that they are trustworthy. So it's integrity by design instead of hoping that it exists. And that's a big shift for everything, for the internet as a whole.
One of our other guests, Alex Leitman, is going to talk about things around the workplace. I think you and I and Alex should have an interview in the coming months to talk about how timestamping could add to the security of your curriculum vitae that you present to somebody in the workplace. Because if you've been detached to all sorts of companies, some of these lists, contain like 20, 30 projects. How will you know that's really true? You can go online. Everybody knows that LinkedIn contains, fraud identities and created stuff over there. So timestamping, I think, could be a great way to make secure that when you left that employment, actually your resume or the fact that you were there was stamped off by the person who hired you, the company that hired you, and create a tremendous asset in your own presentation. Like, you don't need to even check. Everybody in that resume has timestamped me off that I really was there, and what I'm telling here is the truth. Because often when you look back and you look into all these resumes, and right now it's a little bit more difficult, but 10, 20 years ago, there was a disaster. Research showed that 40% of these resumes were downright lies, and I was in that business for a while. So that's really true. You spend an enormous amount of time checking, were you really there? Is this the work that you did? So I see even in the workplace, because we're all starting to work from home, we're starting to work remote, the personal identification with me as a person being in the workplace is going down. Actually, when I'm not visible but just online, that becomes, in my view, a wonderful growth opportunity for timestamping.
And to prove your point here, there's open source software. So, for example, I'm in open source for 15 years. I worked with, I founded one of the first WordPress agencies in the Netherlands. 25 people are working there. And what you see is that we work with WordPress for years. And what problem? Every agency in the Netherlands had the problem that they couldn't find the right people to work for them, because there are not enough technicians, at least in Europe. So what did we do? And then the GDPR came, and nobody wanted to pay for GDPR solutions. It's kind of it's not progress, but I have to pay for it. So what did we decide as an agency? We made a budget of 50, 60,000 euros, and we say, okay, we make the best GDPR plugin in the world, and we make it for free. So that's what we did. We made a GDPR plugin. It was a few months before it was mandatory. We launched it. 2 weeks later, we had 1,000 downloads. A few weeks later, 10,000 downloads. A few weeks later, 100,000. Today, it has 100,000 active users, 1.3 million downloads, and protecting tens of millions of inhabitants of this planet. So, and what did it result into? People working on open source software, easy for them to find a job because they have their resume time-stamped. With WordProof, with timestamping on a blockchain, we can bring this benefit that developers have for over 20 years to everyone else in the world. And that's a big difference to every workplace.
Yes, I think
To prove your point.
Heaven on earth for many HR managers if this could become a widespread reality. We are really through our time. I want to thank you so much, Sebastian, for coming on our cloud conference. I sincerely hope you'll be back for an interview situation with Alex Leitman about this whole development, especially in areas like lending and the workplace. I think it's the growth factor of the future, that this is the missing piece in giving, the users of, I would say, digital products, basically, security for the future. That's timestamping. I want to thank you, Sebastian, so much, and I hope you enjoyed coming on our cloud conference. And
it was a true pleasure. Thanks so much, Annemiek.
Thank you. So after that fantastic contribution of Sebastian on a whole new view on timestamping with WordProof, I would like to invite our sponsor for this event, Eric, you're representing Metaverse DNA, who is hosting actually this terrific event online. Eric, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
There you are. I think we had a fantastic event. I thank you so much for enabling to enable this online, to link our communities together, to talk to people worldwide, because it looks like this pandemic is going to take quite some time still. I think from your initial appeal, which basically is responsibility, calling out for our responsibility as a community, as I would say industry, I take one thing away. We're maturing as an industry. That's what I see. I saw it in the way that Gordon was going into the contractual part, which is obviously one of the aspects of a mature industry, all the way to Alex Leitman pointing out our tremendous development that we need to have as a society, adaptability to this whole new situation that is mainly enabled through IT. And Vince talking about the information part of everything, enabling us to link digital identity in the future to something like timestamping is going to be a revolution for everything that we hold dear as an individual. So I want to thank you so much for sponsoring this event. I think we'll have many more. I hope so, that we will, and have the same terrific level of connecting all these different aspects of our industry maturing together.
Yeah, sure. We will have more of this cloud conference. Thank you for hosting this event. It was great. I think I can call it a success.
You're most welcome, Eric. I'm very sorry that I lost a bit of the connection again. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, it's.
That's one of the things. Connectivity is a key.
It's the pain of growing up of our industry. The technology needs to become more and more mature, and I think it is more and more mature right now. And our industry are growing mature as well.
I think it's a fantastic situation because I'm actually listening through another digital channel to what you were saying, as the connection through Crowdcast failed me on the screen. So I know there are many ways to achieve a goal. And one of the things proven just today with you talking on Crowdcast, I couldn't hear you because we're, I think, about 14 hours flying away from each other right now. I want to thank you so much for enabling all this. I want to thank the community, all our listeners and all our viewers online. And I hope everybody will subscribe to our YouTube channel, listen into our weekly interviews, because they're not commercialized. They're actually really trying to enable our industry to discuss the topics of today. So I want to thank everybody for attending, if you watch now or in the future, and hope to see you at our third cloud conference in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you.